All right, welcome back to VIBE Edu, as this is episode 8 and the last episode of the series under the topic of teacher evaluation. And I wanted to kick things off. Obviously, I've got Kim Gameroz, TJ Vari, Mitch Weathers, and myself, Joshua Stamper, as we're going to be talking about some of the things that are on YouTube. I don't know if our audience knows, but if you don't, you need to quickly go to YouTube and subscribe, because I want to get that number higher, because I know we've got a lot more folks consuming than subscribe, so we've got to fix that. But I've also been posting polls, and one of the polls was from last week. So in episode 7, we discussed ways to improve the start of teacher evaluation process. And I asked, what would improve your teacher observation experience the most? And to my surprise, 100% has been less focus on checklists, more on growth. So does that surprise anyone on the screen? For the audio version, everyone's shaking their head no.
Nope.
I'm going to give another poll for you guys. So I posted, we're diving into the messy world of teacher evaluations on the latest podcast. Which of these challenges have you faced or witnessed in your school? 100% so far on lack of useful feedback. Any thoughts?
Sounds normal.
No one's shocked.
No, I mean, conversations that I've had with teachers in my community, a lot of teachers have been saying, I just wish that my principal had the knowledge and the skill set. Like, I've been the one, right? As I'm speaking for them, I've been the one who's been putting in the work. I've been the one trying out new strategies with kids year after year. I've been the one putting out the fires. I've been the one, right? All of that. And I think it's hard for them to go, okay, then my principal comes in and has nothing for me. And there's no, like, they really do want growth. They really do want support. But when a principal comes in and doesn't have anything to give them, it's kind of like, oh, it's like painful.
I think one of the problems is we've talked about this a little bit before, but like I'll call it this time. I said it before as cadence, but I'll say dosage this time, in terms of like, you've got to go enough. It's such a nuanced profession and so complex what's happening in a classroom that you have to be there enough over time. And so, like, I mean, this is going to air when we're starting a school year, or some people have already started, but it doesn't really matter because tomorrow is the new day. But if you're going to go to classrooms and make visits, it can't just be for the sake of getting the teacher observation done. That's important, and I'll continue to contend that they can be useful, even though there's some people who would argue with that. I think that they're super important, but it has to be augmented with other visits and other types of feedback. And we could talk about that for the whole show. Like, what do I mean by other types of feedback? But one, just since we've been talking about it for 4 episodes, is the informal and formal. Like, if you're going to do a teacher observation in November and you want that to be rich and meaningful for the teacher, you better have been there like 6 or 7 or 8 times already. I want feedback that I want to see feedback from the leader, because we used to do, when I was assistant soup, we used to do feedback on feedback, and sometimes feedback on feedback on feedback. But I want to see feedback that tells a story that you've been there. Like, last time I was here, I didn't see you use a timer, and this time you did use a timer. And it's so awesome to see the professional growth and the use of that timer in place because of this rationale, this reason, what it did for kids, way to get. Like, I want to see praise that demonstrates that you've been there before and you've seen a difference. That's growth. Then you saw the growth. You can't do that if you go once or even twice. You just can't.
Mm-hmm. I always loved getting notes from principals that said, like, yeah, what I noticed, right? I love that. But I had a certain principal for a handful of years who she used the word necessary. And what it was it's messy, and the messy is necessary. And so it's necessary. And she would talk about that during all of our, staff meetings because somebody's upset about something, like every time, as a teacher, you're always going, it's the behavior, it's I don't know, a system that's not working, whatever it is. And she would always look at us and go, it's necessary, right? It's okay that it's messy right now. And what are our next steps? And I used to love getting that feedback too, like on a post-it, like it's necessary. Kim, I noticed this. It's necessary. I was like, gosh, that just felt so good. Like, and again, that's a culture thing, TJ. I know, like we've been talking about that, right? It comes from the top down. And for somebody to go, yeah, it can be messy. It's allowed to be, right? I think it's expected to be. That just changes the culture.
Can I read a comment from someone on YouTube? Okay. Because I think it kind of ties in. So it says, never a gotcha. That's trust, non-judgmental. And you're right, Kim, it's sadly rare. If you want data to be successful, then take care of your school, students, and teachers. I thought that was pretty powerful on what I was saying. So as far as they all said, you are so open to give feedback, not criticism. And I think there's a way in that communication that we can provide feedback and make it so that it isn't personal. It doesn't feel gross and making it like an unsafe space. And I think we kind of talked about that last episode too. But I think that feedback component is obviously being said quite a bit with our community because I'm guessing they've had a lot of bad experience. Either there's a lack of it, or when they do receive it, it's done in a way that doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm. I also love, like, as a teacher, I love a post-it, right? Even if it's just like, I don't even know, just put a happy face. Like, you're amazing. There's the shortest little thing. I saw you. I noticed you. It was safe here. A post-it just so that when a teacher is like waiting for like the formal, like the lengthy, right after the post evaluation thing that we're like waiting for, your anxiety can get up so high, like waiting for that. And so I think just like I don't know, even just a little bit of something goes a long way in the interim part.
What do you say to, this is a segue to TJ's intended next topic, the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to, because I think sometimes the checklist and maybe feedback that's not as elaborate or as good, let's just say, is what do you say to the busy school leader that's just like, really, like, I want to be in the classrooms like that, like you're saying, TJ, like, you have to have been there, but just feel like, I don't know, I can't get there, I just don't have the bandwidth. What for the school leader listening, what do we all say to that? Because my hope is that every school leader is like, of course I want that, that's what I want to be doing. And they're hearing this and saying, how is that even possible?
I mean, one thing, and we talked a little bit about it on the last episode, so I would encourage people to go back and listen to the conversation around reverse time blocking and the hours of the day. So I won't repeat myself with that. But I will say tools, like they're just, we're bogged down. Like if you can't get to classrooms in your day, you've got to get something else. Like you've got to look something up. You've got to read a book. You've got to get a coach. Call me. I mean, that's what we do. Joe and I, that's what we do, is to coach school leaders to be able to get into classrooms. And we actually also coach them on the mechanisms of feedback to make it more meaningful for teachers, including praise. But the one thing that I will say, Mitch, and to underscore is like, you have to. So if you can't, then you've got to do something different. You've got to learn something. You've got to find somebody. You've got to reach out to a peer, but you can't not. So that's just not optional to say, well, I just can't do that. I can't get there. That's never going to work.
Right.
I was thinking
about TJ. I was just thinking too, like TJ, you had talked about like if you feel like you're not getting your teacher evaluations done because X, Y, and Z, then obviously there's a bigger systematic problem to that. And I remember like in my office, I had a whiteboard, and I got to that point, TJ, of understanding like this is just not happening at the frequency that I need it to. In addition to the fact that I talked about like that those relationship walks, and that was important for me as an administrator, just as like my why, and I didn't feel like I was being effective. So I just literally wrote on my board like the statements that I felt were the most important as a reminder for myself. And then I started to break it down as far as what does that system look like. And so if like people getting in my office and interrupting me, like what is the system, the processes that need to occur to make that stop or be more efficient or effective. If it's student behavior, what is it that is lacking, right? And so just to outline like what are my problems and what are the things that are getting in my way, to then create a system to alleviate that, to then focus on my top priorities, which was getting in the classroom, which was building relationships with my staff. So I use that kind of as like a vision board almost, to then just keep my focus and to break down the problems that were getting in the way. Because there were some serious systematic problems that I had in the front office that was requiring me to stay in that space versus getting out into the school. Sorry, Kim.
I'm going to do the opposite just for a second to Mitch's question. The opposite is, these three things, if you're not focused on these three things all the time, then something's wrong. And it's the vision for the school, always communicating the vision, the path forward, people and programs, evaluating people and programs. Like we talked about it on pre-show, this is always an evaluation. Yes, sorry, that's what it is. And so evaluating people and programs, what's working and what's not, both people and initiatives. And then third is innovation, doing something different than we're currently doing to satisfy a need. If something else is coming up besides those three things, especially principals, like you said, school leaders, but sometimes, it's assistant principal, but especially principals, the head honcho in the school. Those three things, when a fourth and a fifth and a sixth come up, you're way off.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking of multiple schools. Like as we've been talking, I was like, oh yeah, that school. Oh yeah, that school too. Oh yeah, that school, right? And I was thinking about how so many principals will reach out to us and they'll say, I have so many student behaviors. The teachers are not happy. They're overwhelmed. Can you come in and can you help me? Because I really just want to be able to get in and support them. And I can't because I'm bogged down with all of the student behaviors, right? And when we come in and we support the teachers and we give them the systems that they need and the language that they need to support not only themselves, but also to support all the kids in their classroom, all of a sudden, those behaviors start to kind of diminish, right? And now we're not sending kids constantly up to the front office so that principal can then come out of their space, right? And go and do all of those observations and give that beautiful feedback that they want to give and provide their teachers. But again, like we always say this, like you're not meant to do this work alone. As a teacher, you're not, as a principal, you're not, as a district leader, you do really need somebody from the outside looking in so that you can do this from the inside out, from your heart. Like everybody's in this because, I mean, hopefully we've talked about this too. Hopefully their heart was in the right place. So they want to do this work. And so I think it is like TJ, when you said that's the work that we do, I was like, yep, that's the work that we do. You coach them, we coach the teachers so that everybody gets to be able to do the work that they're meant to do, but you're not supposed to do it alone.
Right.
Mitch.
All right. Well, before Mitch talks, because I want to pick his brain. So we've talked about feedback and we've talked about frequency and it being a checklist, not really focusing on growth. And there's a ton of comments. I'm not going to read them all, but it is all around the same theme. So obviously the current system that we're working in, and maybe TJ, you're foaming at the mouth at this answer, but if we, as a core group here, is reconfiguring that construct of teacher evaluations, I want to know what it would look like for you guys. Perfect system.
Perfect system. I think one part of it that would be really, really interesting is incorporating peer observations or evaluations as part of the whole evaluation. And just, it's so helpful, of course, having really good feedback and a really good administrator guiding you and all that. But just going and watching other people teach is so illuminating. different subjects, different grade level, just and having that be a part of the process. I've experienced that in an informal way, more teacher driven. That would be, I think there's something very formative in terms of formative meaning, like a formative assessment about that. That's two-way. So
yeah, I'll double down on that one real quick. I think the system, like if you're asking the question about the system, which I really do want to talk about, so I can't.
He keeps planting seeds. That's why I said that word, just so we have a nice segue.
Yeah, we both
even
set
if
them up,
it's
Mitch.
4 episodes from now.
I mean, if this is volleyball, we just said it, and we're waiting for TJ to spike.
Yeah,
so let's go, TJ.
So I think that the top-down aspect of the system is wrong. Like, I wish that could be a little more horizontal. Like, why is it that the assistant principals and principals are the only people who can do the evaluations? Like, what if you could pick your peer evaluator? Like, if you're average or above at teaching, like, why do you need an administrator in your class to do the observation? Again, I'm calling for like a lot more informal. So I want that to be part of it as well. But the department chair or the grade level leader or the 4th grade level leader, like the structure of teacher leadership, I think if we could change that and you'd say, okay, the department chair, the 4th grade team leader or somebody is going to do my evaluation. Because it really is, to Mitch's earlier point, it really is kind of a lot to ask. Like, let's just say at a middle school, the principal and assistant principal to do 60 or 70 teacher evaluations in a year and do them well. We could talk more about like how to make that easier and better, but I also think just spread it out. Like, there's plenty of people here who know a lot about instruction. Let's get them put their eyeballs on it.
Yeah, but what's the system even supposed to do? Like, for instance, you just said it, TJ, right? We have a staff of 100 people, and that's support staff and teachers. Every one of them gets an evaluation. But what you pointed out, right? What if you only have a principal and 1 AP? What if you only have a principal and 2 APs? Well, all of that work falls on them, and then what you're getting is a time crunch to then not really do the best version because of that. And so now we're just getting sloppy feedback or very little that's getting provided. So what is the system really meant for? It's not to, I think you said this earlier, TJ, like, it's not like they're getting a higher pay if they get a certain score on their evaluation. It's really if you're going to be non-renewed. And we know that process too, as far as a non-renewal takes a ton of documentation over a long period of time with a ton of evidence, especially if you're tenured. Good luck. Okay. That's a different system. And we may touch on that before or later, but my point being is, like, what is the evaluation system as far as a goal really meant for? If it's meant for growth, then I think what we're all saying is the current system is broken and it's not helping anyone. So thankfully, I know in the state of Texas, like when I was working as admin, we got to put people on a 3-year system or rotation where they didn't have to be evaluated during that time. And so it did decrease our level of engagement in the sense of formal evaluation. Now, we still went into classrooms, even if they weren't on that rotation, but it still was the goal as far as the campus and the culture. I think that's different than like at the state level. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I like that type of flexibility, but I also want some other professional development to go with that, because I fear that there then becomes a void of feedback for the teacher. That scares me. I want the most amount of feedback with the least amount of bureaucracy.
I was thinking about, there's so many school districts that we work with where there's a slew of instructional coaches. And it's interesting because every single school district is different in the way they use their instructional coaches. So either they're in charge of like different subject matters, right? You've got like your math person, your ELA person, your science, like whatever. Maybe they do it like that, or they'll do it where like they're assigned a school or a couple schools. And as we were talking, I was thinking that might be a really great use of an instructional coach, because they're creating that safe space, right, with a teacher. They're really getting to know them. It is kind of like that peer to peer, right? Instead of like your principal or your AP coming in. So like kind of like Mitch, what you were talking about ish, right? But I was thinking that might be a really good way to form this community also. Like we've been talking about that a lot. I don't know. My wheels are kind of turning and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, can one of these schools, like district leaders who's like really listening right now, go, maybe we can kind of, I don't know, dabble, just maybe try it out and see what that's like. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, we use our instructional coaches for that, but it wasn't, again, it was informal. So it wasn't like, because I think the greatest thing is fear in the system. That's the number one emotion that most people feel when they're going through that as a teacher and having someone of power come into their classroom. The fear is, okay, this is going to be recorded in some way in a negative space that's going to be on my record forever. That's truly what it is. So when you have, like to Mitch's point, a peer come in and it's a peer review and it's peer feedback, but it's not going anywhere outside of the conversation between the two teachers, well, that brings that fear down quite a bit because now it's two neutral pieces that are communicating. So then if you talk about an instructional coach, I think the same thing could happen. Now, some people might view that as a person of power coming into, so there's a little bit of a dynamic there. But if there's an understanding that what's being communicated is it's truly for their growth and not something that's going to be documented into a file and attached to their name and attached to their person, I think that changes the system and how they view it. And I think that's what I was trying to get to as far as like the system. Like there's not a whole lot of motivation for a teacher to do it unless they're intrinsically motivated to be their best version. So the system itself, I think that's where I have a tough time with it as far as someone coming in and doing a formal, because it really is a hotbed for fear and not many other emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece of this is the teacher having confidence in the evaluator, whether formal or informal.
Yeah.
I remember clearly, early on, even in my student teaching, where I was just like, one, I rarely saw the person who was supposedly my mentor, and the feedback was just so. I quickly realized, like, well, I'm not going to learn a whole lot here. But when later in my career, even in like year 1, year 2, year 3, like the people that were in the room, informal, whether it was support, whatever, it's like I was really interested in what they had to say because I respected them as a instructional, almost guru at times. And I wanted their feedback. I wanted the critical in particular, So that's another layer to it. It can't just be anybody coming in and making observations, and at least in my opinion.
Here's something weird to go with it, right? So the fear part to me is just weird. Number one, if you're listening, you're a school leader and you use evaluation tools that way, stop.
Yeah.
Like
seriously,
I don't know of an evaluation system, and I work, we all work in tons of states. I don't know, and I do feedback for a living. I don't know of an evaluation system that was meant from the start to be punitive. Like I don't think I don't know of one that's meant to be like that. Now you can use, performance plans and all that stuff that sometimes comes with a bad evaluation, but they're not meant to be fear-driven systems. I just don't know of one. That's, if you're doing it that way, just stop. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's good.
but it does happen, TJ.
It does happen. So here's another layer of it. I actually think this is maybe another weird layer. I think that because everybody's safe all the time, that we all feel like we're not safe. So I think it should be really clear, like what classroom practices should look like and whether or not I'm meeting that standard and whether or not the person up the hall is too. Because I think the scared teacher, like the good there's lots of great teachers listening to this right now. And they're going, well, I'm scared the next time an observer comes in. Well, part of that is because there's somebody who's not getting the work done to standard who we don't know. Like they're just allowed to be safe too. Does that make sense? Like, I think like if there's not a like meritocracy of some sort created
Mhm.
within the system, then, and I like the teacher leader part of that and part of that conversation. If there's not a meritocracy of some sort, then yeah, sure, we can all be scared all the time because who knows what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think I learned more as a teacher.
There's no standard.
Well, I think I learned more as far as teaching actually as an administrator than I did as a teacher, which is backwards, but because of the opportunities and what I was getting into as far as the classrooms and the PD and training as far as what I'm looking for as far as an observer and all this other stuff, I'm like, oh crap, I wish I would have known this when I was in the classroom. And I wish I had these opportunities, similar to what Mitch was talking about with the peer thing too, is because I got to go into classrooms so often as a teacher leader, but then also as a dean of students and as assistant principal, to then say, okay, I've got this vast amount of experience now of seeing and modeling all this other stuff of what works, but I never had an opportunity to take any of that information and actually apply it. I could now do something with it as far as providing feedback to my teachers and do a formal evaluation or informal evaluation. But as far as myself as a teacher, sometimes I wish other teachers had those opportunities because I think that would actually diffuse the fear because they're going to be like, oh, this classroom is struggling like I'm struggling, or this classroom's amazing and they're doing practices similar to what I'm doing. I think some of the unknown is what causes that fear versus if you're actually getting into those settings and seeing what's going on, I think that would diffuse some things.
Mm-hmm. I just keep on thinking of all my teachers and like their favorite thing to do is to go and see one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even when I'm going out and visiting, like in a week, I'm going out to New Jersey and I'm visiting one of my teachers, and they're dying for like pictures or short clips or anything, like just anything. Not even like with children yet. They're not even going to have children yet. Students don't come until September. It's going to be August. So, but they're like they just want to watch and observe and soak in, and they do their best learning like that through observing through like all of that. I just feel like yeah, it needs to be embedded within all these little parts, right? All of them.
I think they crave that because they've experienced it. And that's to Mitch's earlier point. I think the culture shift of opening up the doors and people getting in and out of classrooms, even if you have to force it at first, that's critical. Because you're right, Kim, like the minute you get to watch another teacher teach, it can change the way you think about all of your lesson planning, etc. Especially if you get to see some like really good teaching. I had the pleasure of when I was a second year teacher, I would say my first real contract as a teacher, I had the pleasure of having a team of people who were just phenomenal. They were all better than me. And I got to watch them. And it changed the way that I thought about teaching. And I can't imagine early in my career, at least, being siloed and not being able to see the wonderful teaching that I got to see my second, third, fourth year as a teacher. Changed my life, changed my practice. Maybe I wouldn't have become an assistant principal or a principal or an assistant superintendent. Maybe.
Right. But it's those I often in talking with family members or teachers or reflecting on my time on campus on a staff and just like that was like I miss it every day. It was so much fun. It was like what was going on at our school for about 15 to 20 years was just by no means perfect, but just like rich, vivid, and even kids who experienced it, students. But to your point, TJ, you sounds like you had some of that experience, but it's too often the experience of teachers, the isolation. Like there's no sense of this greater mission. That's not again not about perfections, good days, bad days. You know, all teachers have good days and bad days, and seeing that and being a part of it. But if you're not like plugged in some way, to the community. It's just to me, it's tragic, and I think that's all wrapped up in observation. Because you can also see a teacher either that is still emerging, maybe with their skills, is past due, way past their prime, should have probably left the classroom a long time ago, or anywhere in between, the most gifted, and you'll learn something being in their classrooms. And so that culture is there of just being around, chatting. If you walk into a room, it's not a disruption where the kids aren't like, oh, why is so and so, like, it just is there. That can be such a rich experience.
Let me validate one more thing about the fear, because I know that we were talking about it earlier. The validation is this: what we all need to realize is that at any minute this can fall apart. I think that's part of the fear that people have, is like, yeah, you're coming in for 45 minutes, but we both know that at any second this could totally fall apart.
Totally.
There's 32.
That's some of the fun of it, though, right?
That's the love. That's the lovely aspect of it. It's the wonderful part of it, is like, I'm
walking that line
together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what? I started my teaching career not in my own classroom for years, and I had my son in between and everything. I took any sort of job that they would give me because they weren't hiring teachers during that time. And I went in year after year going, I've got dance teaching experience. I used to dance with the Laker girls and the Clipper girls. Like, are you going to accept that also? I had my own dance room and I coached high school dance team. Will you take that? And they're like, nope, bottom of the barrel for this girl, right? Every single time. And they took the people who had been teaching and have their own classroom for a year, took them from a different district, whatever, right? I was like, not her, absolutely not. And I hated it, of course. I hated that for years, right? And I was like crying to my husband every time, like, help, what's wrong with me, right? What is it? But now it truly was such a blessing, because what did I get to do? For years, I got to go into multiple classrooms and I got to observe what I loved, what I knew I was never going to take it into my own classroom. If they had an instructional coach, I was right alongside that instructional coach, and I was able to pick up on all the stuff. So when I was finally in a classroom, I was like, game on. You don't even know what's coming into this classroom. Like, I'm taking over. I've got this, right? And it was it was so hard at the time, but I think that was truly so powerful, at least for me. Like, Josh, when you were like, yeah, it wasn't until I got out and I was already an administrator and I was like, I wish I could have had this when I had my own classroom, right? And now it's like, how much coaching can I possibly give these teachers? But yeah, I think that observation, observing your colleagues, watching instructional coaches, all of that just is so, it's life-changing for teachers.
Yeah, I got a glimpse of that as a paraprofessional before. Like, I was working to get my teaching license because I had a different path after college. I was a graphic designer, but I had to switch because of the recession. But honestly, like, looking back, the paraprofessional 2 years of doing that was huge, because I was not only getting to be in a ton of classes as I was following students, but then also I was able to kind of get those things that were modeled for me and get the teaching to get my teaching license, because I was taking night classes. So I felt like I was getting two best versions of the world, because I was getting that theory at night, and then I was also getting to see how it was applied during the day as I was a paraprofessional. What were you gonna say, Mitch?
Well, you asked the question at the beginning about rethinking evaluations, and what I'm hearing is if it were possible for a teacher to experience what we're talking about right now in the evaluation or observation process, that's the win. Because what we're talking about is, it really is kind of getting metacognitive about teaching, which you can only do through reflection. And you think about your own practice in a new way when you see other people practicing. And it's analogous to why in classrooms, who's doing the learning? Is it the teacher or the students? There's a lot of learning that happens in lesson planning and lesson delivery, because you're getting metacognitive about the stuff you already know. And the more year after year, you get even deeper in that. So thinking about how you switch, in that teacher student dynamic. We want the students to be more active participants as opposed to passive objects. And the same thing is true in evaluations. Like, how could we rework the system? And I know there's more to the system, TJ, than just walkthroughs, evaluations, and observations, but so that everything that we're saying about, oh gosh, I started learning so much when I was in this space, whether it was pre-service or post-service, teacher service, how do you weave that in? And that's where I think that peer-to-peer culture could offer some of that, in particular, if there's deliberate dialogue on the backside of those interactions, observations, seeing your teacher, and then talking about it.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, I'm all jazzed up about that, Mitch, because here's some other truths that we get wrong. One is that there is a such thing as a reflective practitioner. You can reflect on practice, but it's really hard to do by yourself. To reflect on what you're trying to do while you're trying to do it. I think we talked about this, but the cognitive scientists have come out and said that doesn't work that way. So you need a tool. It could be an observation. It could be somebody in the back of the classroom. But I like what you're saying along the lines of, if I was going to systematize that, I might say, okay, within your observation cycle, you have to do X number of other peer observations and maybe even complete an activity of some sort with that information, whether it be about yourself or about your peers. I wouldn't make that evaluative. I would just make it part of the system. So hopefully there's some system leaders here, state superintendents, who can inject that into their way of doing things. Because I think if you just said, like, along the cycle, so here's the cycle, you've got to also do these other things within the cycle besides just be observed. And then to Kim's point, my first contract, I was a permanent placement substitute. So I showed up every day to work, and I didn't know what I was going to be teaching or in which room I was teaching. And it was so awesome. Number one, I learned that I would use this years later as an assistant principal and principal, that every teacher had a different way of doing things. You know, Mitch talks about executive functioning. Like, imagine kids, like I imagined kids in these spaces where I'm like, you've got 6 bosses today and they all have different rules, and that is not good for a kid. So I didn't know it then, but when I became a school leader, that was one thing that I was like, bound and determined, like, we're going to all have the same systems of support for kids and for teachers. But number two, I get to teach, like, I learned so much about what not to do. I will tell you that I learned more about what not to do because of what the system was that was left for me by a teacher than I did about what to do. It was still question marks on how to do this well, but man, I was like, I'll never put the sign on the wall that says you can't chew gum. Like, I'll never do that.
TJ, back to what you were talking about. I actually did see a system in school. A school principal did this, and when you said, you know, a system for peer observations, it actually jarred my memory, because when I was student teaching, that actually occurred on our campus, and that was just a campus culture thing. So the principal had it as, you just by the end of the school year, you needed to have 3 peer observations, and there was a form that you filled out, and it was a reflective process that was presented. But the cool thing about it is this had been going on for very, very long. Like, it was many, many years that this was in place, because that principal was there for so long that the campus just did them on their own. So they surpassed the 3, and they would just do it on their own. So like, my teacher that I was attached to, he on his off period would just go into another classroom, and it didn't matter. You know, it might be a science, might be math. He was an art teacher, but he didn't care about the subject matter. He was just looking at the practices that were occurring. And I remember going with him and sitting down and doing the same thing, because I just wanted to learn more. I was hungry. I wanted to make sure that I was a good teacher when I got my teaching license. And so, yeah, I loved that system. It was beautiful. And there was obviously a small expectation that was established by the principal, and it was formal in that sense. And I guess some teachers could have just done their 3, checked it off, and moved on. But it seemed like from all the people that I met that they would just jump into classrooms when they had a chance, and it wasn't a high stakes thing. It was just they wanted to be better, and I loved that system.
I think making it mandatory is important. I mean, I love the teachers listening right now who are going to do this on their own and they're going to find peers and stuff. I'm for that. But I also think within a culture, if it's not mandatory, there's somebody working in there right now who wants to do it, but it's afraid to ask peers if they can come in and to observe them do this very precious, sensitive, and personal thing. So, but if you say everybody's got to do 3, it opens up the doors, not just for the people who wouldn't have done it, of course, but for people who want to, but the system's not designed that way. I think it relieves those who are like, yeah, even if they don't say that in the faculty meeting or in the lounge, they still are thinking, yeah, but it's kind of good that we get to see each other.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about
well, and if you, oh, go ahead.
You go.
I was just going to say, if you mandate it, you can make sure that, like, if it was me and I was really busy, I'm going to go to Kim's class, I'm going to go to Josh's class, I'm going to go to TJ's class. And then I'm going to go back to Kim's class. I'm going to just go to my friend's classes. It's like, no, you got to go. If it's mandated, you could put a little bit of structure to it, which would be really beneficial.
Okay, I love that. I love that. And yes, that's definitely needed. Otherwise, they will go to their friends' classrooms. Of course, they will. I would. I mean, I would. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to you.
Yeah.
You like that's it. We're gonna hang out. Like that's what we're doing.
I heard it. Yeah.
But what I was thinking back to instructional coaches, and I was thinking, okay, but who's coaching them, and who's evaluating them, and what does that look like, also, right? Because they also need to continuously learn and grow and reflect and refine. And so I know we do that. And I had somebody from an organization, she had kind of asked me, this was a year and a half ago now, I want to say, she was like, do you go in and do you coach your mentor teachers? Because I have people that work for me, right? These amazing mentors that get to coach teachers also, right? And when I'm not available to fly out, they fly out and they're coaching. And she had asked me, like, kind of like in a gotcha moment, she was like, well, do you coach them? And I was all, yes. And she's like, well, how often? And what does that look like? And my response was, every day, all day long. And she was like, what? And I brought up Voxer. And I know we've talked about this. I mean, we talked to each other, the 4 of us, on Voxer. And I was like, we are constantly in connection every single day. We are constantly talking about what happened with teachers in classrooms, how they responded. I can hear their conversations because they're in small cohorts with teachers. I know their tone with the teachers that they're talking to. I can hear them coaching principals even. Like that's happening all the time. And then we have a separate cohort, right, with just us. We're talking and we're refining. It's not like we hop on Zoom once a month and just have like an hour to discuss. Like that's not it. It is every day is refining our practice also. So I'm not just kind of thinking about instructional coaches and what that looks like from a district perspective also.
Well, that brings up rounds. And I think those are really important too, because now we're going to take a group of leaders or a group of teachers into a couple of classrooms, and then we're going to discuss what we saw. And I even like to the point about peer is how about that person gets coached in front of other people? And so the Voxer piece is critical because they're all on there. And so they hear you coaching somebody and they get to listen to the feedback that you're giving to a person in real time. And you can do that with rounds. We did that with district rounds and school rounds. And so that's another layer that we haven't really discussed is like the teacher evaluation formal, got to do it. Walkthroughs, Mitch is saying there's a lot of school leaders who can't get there. So we need systems. And then another layer where we're going together into these spaces and we're either dissecting what happened or literally somebody's getting coached in real time while everybody watches. That's a vulnerable moment for all of us. Even the person who's doing the coaching, right? Now you got an audience for what you're saying. And so it's twofold. I think that's another layer.
Okay. Well, I think we were going to wrap this up because we could probably talk for another 3 hours on this topic. And maybe some of these components that we've discussed in these 4 episodes will pop up in future series. But for those who are listening, I mentioned at the beginning, obviously this podcast is on YouTube. We want you to subscribe. We want you to like. We love the comments. There's polls on there now. So we want you to fill that out also to give us some feedback. And of course, on our podcast platforms, we love for you to do the same thing. So as we continue this, we want you to connect with all of us. In the show notes, we've got our websites, all of our services, things that we have, freebies. I mean, we do it all here on the VIBE Edu podcast, and we want to support. That's where this is all coming from. So these vulnerable chats, us opening up, looking at various topics, is because we are looking to change education, and we're looking for folks who want to be a part of a community to make things better, not only on your campus, on your district, but overall the whole umbrella of education. And that can't happen without each individual that's listening doing something and having that ripple effect. So we appreciate you listening. Share this out. And of course, if there's a future topic or conversation you want us to have, we'd love for your feedback. I mean, we're talking about feedback here today. We want yours too. So drop it in a comment, reach out to us on social media. And with that, we want to thank you for joining this episode 8 and the last of our series, Teacher Evaluations.